And a single mom came up to me at the end of one of the meetings, and she said, one of my children needs to have a procedure. She explained it to me. It was an ear procedure, and my heart just sank. I mean, I'm brand new into this industry. I've got a good client, and I see how health insurance is negatively impacting this person. It's going to ruin this person's financial life. She doesn't have the money, but she's got kids that she's got to take care of.
So, Chris Hamilton, good to see you, the practice leader at Hotchkiss Insurance. Correct? I get the title and everything correct? Did I nail a practice leader benefit? What are you? Correct me, man. It's okay.
I'm a partner at Hotchkiss.
Okay.
And I do run our employee benefits practice, but it's just easier to say partner.
Okay.
I'm an insurance guy.
You're an insurance guy. Well, so if probably by the time this airs, right, your other episode will be out, and I'll go ahead and kind of position that now and talk about why you're coming back again so soon, and for good reason. So, Chris, if somebody has already watched this previous episode, you were participating in my little mini-series about sales best practices, and we're very intentional on that episode of kind of focusing on things that are universally applicable for salespeople to be better, not necessarily insurance specific. The issue with that is you and I connect over benefits. You and I connect over your self-funded philosophy and what you're doing for your clients. And so I wanted you to come back, and now let's actually talk about what you do, in more practical terms. So why don't you reintroduce yourself for those folks that have already heard that previous episode? Who are you? What do you do? And then we'll get into a lot of the conversation about benefits.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I appreciate you having me back on. It means a lot to me, so thank you.
My pleasure, man.
So again, I'm Chris Hamilton. I'm a partner with Hotchkiss Insurance. We're a statewide insurance agency, and my specialty is employee benefits. And I did not grow up, didn't go to school thinking I would ever sell insurance or do benefits advising. My background is actually in corporate finance, and I spent a little over 15 years in corporate finance and banking. And in that time, the ACA was passed. I saw how health insurance costs were negatively impacting my clients. The costs always seemed to rise. They didn't seem to have a solution on how to manage that cost, and it was extracting value from their companies. And in that process of learning about health insurance, I realized a couple of things really quickly. One, the industry in a lot of respects is inefficient, or really it's broken. It's because of the consolidation that's happened, vertical integration by insurance carriers. There's not a lot of competition. It doesn't function like a normal industry would. And that's one of the reasons why companies end up paying more and their employees end up paying more than they should. And so in my mind, as I just kind of looked at the landscape, I thought to myself, this is a big problem for companies. And if somebody could come up with a solution, they would be able to create a good business that would be profitable. They could do good for companies and would allow them in turn to do good for their employees. And so for me, I'm a highly competitive person, but I also have a strong sense of justice streak. I've seen how healthcare's negatively impacted friends and family. And I thought to myself, there was a passion that I had of, I'm going to figure out how to solve this.
Well, that's funny. So you were not in the industry when you discovered the problem, right? But so how were you exposed to kind of the financial component for these employers where you recognize, like there's something broken here? Like how did you uncover this?
So in finance, you have access to these companies' financial statements. And in many cases, I had 3 to 5 years worth of financial statements of these companies. And I would sit down and meet with the CEOs and CFOs regularly, doing a financial review, whether it was they were buying a business or financing equipment or whatever it was. And you have to understand a number of things about these companies very intimately. How do they compete? Understand how they make money, where their vulnerabilities and margins and all that, right, financially speaking. So I would look at their financial statements, and I became very acutely interested in healthcare because of the Affordable Care Act. There obviously are penalties that employers are subject to if they're not compliant. And so I started asking the question of these CEOs and CFOs, are you compliant with the law? And I was really surprised because a lot of them just kind of shrugged their shoulders. Nobody really understood what compliance was at that point. And with no good response, my follow-up question was, I'm looking at their financials. I'm like, guys, this is like a really big expense for you. How do you manage it? And I was equally surprised by their responses. Like, well, there's not really anything you can do. It's whatever the carriers and brokers tell us our costs are going to be every year. And I'm like looking at this and thinking, wow, this is going up a lot every single year, and you have no way to manage this. And by the way, these companies were pretty sophisticated. They were involved in complicated financial transactions and commodity hedges, and they've got very sophisticated ways of managing everything else in their business. But this one really large item, and for a lot of these companies, it was the second or third most expensive thing on their P&L. They had no way of managing it. And so it was just a real head scratcher to me. And I started asking questions of those that I knew that were in the industry, and kind of hearing what they had to say about it versus what the clients were wanting. It was like, wow, there's like this huge chasm, if you will, between what the market's delivering and what clients actually want.
So that's did you really recognize you like, oh, I think I can like solve this? Well, actually, let me go back before I ask that question. I want to comment on what you're saying. It's like the industry kind of dumbed employers down. Like, because what you're saying is, oh, well, our broker and our carriers kind of tell us what the cost is going to be. Well, it's like, well, like you said, if it's your second or third largest line item on your P&L, probably some of the corporations you're dealing with, that's in the tens of millions of dollars, right, of total spend. And their answer is just, well, I mean, that's what our carriers gave us an increase. Our broker negotiated down, and that's what happens this year, and that's what will happen every year in perpetuity. And that's the extent of the thought that some of them, not all of them, put into it. But it's kind of crazy that, like you said, they'll get hyper sophisticated on probably like margins and float and dealing with, cash flow and probably down to the widget, cost of doing business. Yet they'll go, that's over here, and our broker handles that. It's crazy.
Well, they've got better strategies to manage their printing costs than they do healthcare, which is, it's just surprising to me, because that's a 1% cost versus something that's 20% of
exactly. But so you looked at it and go, well, oh, that's interesting. And wait, they're not really doing much. So when did you recognize, though, oh, I actually could actively either build a business or be part of solving this instead? Because you didn't have any insurance background prior to this point, right?
No, I had none. And I wasn't quite sure when I got in the business how to solve the problem. I just knew, I understood what the problem was, or I had an idea of what the problem was. And for me, it was, I had some friends that were in the business that gave me an opportunity to join their organization, to learn about healthcare and health insurance. And I thought to myself, this is my opportunity to try to provide some value in the marketplace above and beyond what I could do in the finance world. And it was a way for me to leverage the skills that I already had, analyzing numbers and understanding financial concepts, and bringing that to what I do today, is bringing a little bit different spin to it.
Well, that's what I like about it, because you're approaching it from a purely objective standpoint at that point, right? Like, this is what it costs to do this. This is what it potentially could cost to do this. And it's like you don't have a lot of the, you almost came into it with a blank slate of like, hey, I can solve this. This is just numbers at the end of the day, and I know how to solve for that. I like when, even like you not being a salesperson traditionally, kind of like me, I was a finance guy myself too. Like, you come to a part of our industry with a new set of eyes and a fresh perspective, and you don't necessarily have to undo behaviors or habits that were entrenched in you that might have been passed down to you by other people who are like, oh, well, we don't know how to solve it either, kid. This is how you do it, and don't question things. You brought a curiosity to it, which is refreshing to hear.
Yeah, I think momentum or inertia is a powerful thing. People talk about it, but if you just kind of relate it to what it is that we do, if you've got an established book of business, whether you're an individual producer or you're a big brokerage organization, if you've got a large book of business already in place and it's on this path of renewal implementation, it's hard for you to intercept that momentum or inertia and change directions. Yeah. And as a new entrant years ago, I was starting with a blank slate after the ACA was passed. So it gave me a different perspective of how to provide value and solutions to the marketplace.
Well, I was going to ask you, so like you switch your career essentially at this point. So what was the first start into benefits? Like, what did that look like for you? Like, kind of tell me the blocking and tackling and where you worked and all those things.
So I was in banking. I went to work for a local firm in Fort Worth. It's actually my best friend ran it. Okay. He still runs it to this day. They're now part of a big national organization, which happened after I left there. And I spent my first several years just calling on everybody I'd ever done business with in my prior 15 years. And the conversations were really interesting with some of these companies. And the responses that we got, I explained my why. I saw the issue that was happening to these companies, and I said, I'm out here to try to fix this for you. I don't exactly understand or know what those solutions are, but just know this is what we can do for you today, but this is the direction that we're going over the next 3 to 5 years, and I'm going to try to fix this for you the same way I've done business with you in the past. And I was able to pick up broker of record letters pretty easily in those first few years, just telling that story and trying to provide value to those companies. And it really hit me in the face very early on. One of my large banking clients became my first client in the benefits space. And I picked up their business about 2 months prior to their renewal. And they were fully insured. And they ended up getting, I believe it was a 12 or 15% increase. And we negotiated. We did the typical broker thing, send it to market, shop the carriers against each other. I think we got it down to like 8%, which, felt good about, right? But I remember going through those open enrollment meetings with their employees, and a single mom came up to me at the end of one of the meetings, and she said, I've got 3 kids, and one of my children needs to have a procedure. She explained it to me. It was an ear procedure. He had an ear issue. And the only plan I can afford is this $6,000 HSA. It's the only one I can afford. I don't have $6,000. So what are my options? What can I do? And she had tears in her eyes. Yeah. And my heart just sank. I mean, I'm brand new into this industry. I've got a good client, and I see how health insurance is negatively impacting this person. It's going to ruin this person's financial life. She doesn't have the money, but she's got kids that she's got to take care of. Yeah. And at the time, the traditional model was brokers get paid a percentage of the premium as a commission, right?
Right.
And so my friends were like, hey, you got your first client and you got a raise, because their premiums went up. And at that moment, I thought to myself, I'm actually profiting off of this person's demise.
Yes.
And they didn't sit well with me. And immediately in that moment, I went to that client and said, this is how I get paid. I don't want to get paid this way. It's not fair to you. It's not fair to your employees. And I want to move to a fee. And that right there kind of transformed the first little iteration, if you will, the first step, which was trying to align the interests of the client and the broker. I think there's a lot of misaligned incentives. You'll hear me talk about that. Conflicts of interest. I think that's the first one, aligning the way that we get paid to what the outcome the employer wants to receive is.
Yeah. Did you come to that conclusion organically, or were you aware that other consultants were being paid in that manner?
I had no idea at that time. Okay. My buddies actually are the ones that explained to me, hey, there's an option. You can do this. Because I went to them and said, I don't feel good about this. I'm getting a raise, but the company's paying more, the employees are paying more, and this doesn't feel fair. And I'm not doing more work. Why can't I just align the work that I do, the compensation with the scope of work? And that's kind of how that came about. That's actually how a lot of the things that we do today have come about. It's just error and issue that you see, and then other smart people help you solve it.
Yeah, well, I love that, man, and I love that you recognize it early. And I would agree with you 1,000%, the untethering of the compensation from the carriers, right, as much as possible. I realize there are certain products where comp is just built in, right? And you can't even take it out, right? Like filed with comp, and they do pay for other tech. And so I understand why there's certain products that are delivered in that manner. But the healthcare itself, the medical spend, the prescription spend, untethering that from the carrier, I think makes complete sense. And it's almost unjustifiable to argue the other direction, in my opinion. It's a very tenuous line, morally and ethically, I think, to argue for the other way.
Yeah, there's one thing to be compensated based on volume, which is what premium is, or there are other brokers out there that will tie compensation into other aspects of the medical plan, like pharmacy. It's been interesting going to market to employers and tying compensation to performance. So there are a number of ways that you can do that.
Will you explain that further? Because I know some brokers do that, but I don't know the blocking and tackling of that.
So it's hard for me. If a real common one that people will see in the vendor space is percentage of savings. And I think there's value in that if you're willing to put a cap to it. I don't think we should have unlimited upside when it comes to the healthcare piece. I mean, look, I'm a for-profit organization, and we do make money. But I believe the money that we make is tied to the value that we provide in the marketplace. A real simple way is to say a percentage of savings. So if you think about on a gross basis, if an employer is spending $1 million and I go to that employer and say, hey, if I cut your spend by 20%, I get a piece of that.
Okay.
It's really hard for me to be able to say that to an employer because I can't control a lot of things. One, I can't control, is somebody going to get in a motorcycle accident? Is somebody going to get cancer? There are a lot of things that are outside of our control, but there are certain things that we can control, and that's unit-based costing. So what does it cost for somebody to get medications, particularly the expensive ones like specialty meds? What does it cost for somebody to get infusion or to have a baby birth or a hip replacement? So if you can tie your solution to a specific financial outcome, I think it's great to be able to put a performance metric in place.
Well, Kristen, you're just in knowing you, and you and I've sat down a couple of times, you're clearly very intelligent. And I don't mean that to toot your horn, but the way that you talk about this, there's so much passion that undergirds it all, but also you know what you're talking about, and it's really refreshing to see somebody that's also like, I can feel you feel justified in what you do because you know you're trying to do the right thing. And I appreciate that. But other than, hey, I recognize a problem and wanted to solve it, and I know I can build a business around it that's healthy, was there anything, I mean, you've kind of shared some stories with me earlier, but is there anything that really under the surface, right, that guides why you are so passionate about this industry?
Yeah, I think about, I think everybody has some story like this in their life, but I think about my brother. I've got two brothers, and one of my brothers got really sick a few years ago. He worked for a really big company. It was a Fortune 500 company, and he got sick, and it was a multi-year sickness. And through his benefit program and the way it was designed, he was with a big national broker. He ended up spending out of pocket tens of thousands of dollars over those years, and it had a really negative impact on him. It ruined him financially at the time. And what was ironic to me is that I have a client that's literally in the same industry right down the street from where my brother worked that has a different way of managing costs. And had my brother worked for my client, he would have had no out-of-pocket costs for any of his health care. I mean, they provide everything end-to-end, direct primary care, concierge medicine, all the way through direct contracted hospitals where they waive the cost of care. So he literally could have had all of his procedures done at no cost to him. And what's interesting to me the most about that scenario is you have on one side this Fortune 500 company. They have the size and scale to be able to use some of these programs. If anybody can do it, they can, but they choose not to, or they don't know how to do it. And you have another employer they're not massive, but they're not little bitty either. They've got a presence across the state, but by no means are they anybody would consider a really large employer. But they have figured out how to manage the cost of healthcare, which is the reason why we talk about healthcare a lot is because what you pay for healthcare is a direct correlation of what you're going to pay for insurance.
Okay.
I mean, if you think about that, these insurance companies are for profit. No matter where you go in the insurance space, they're for-profit entities. And so if it's going to cost $1 million to provide health care to your employees, they can't charge you less than that and make a profit. They've got to charge you more. So that's why managing the cost of health care is so important. And for me, that happened to me several years after, or that happened to my brother after I'd already been in the industry for some time. And I mentioned a sense of justice. It upset me. And it led me to believe, and just through exploration and talking to other people in the industry, the mainstream advisors aren't trying to solve that particular issue, I don't feel.
Yeah. Well, it sounds almost like it's good, even though you'd already been in the industry a couple of years, like it's like a renewed sense of purpose, right? Like the conversation you had with that lady and the 3 children, right? Like every once in a while you get reminded of how much impact you actually have and these recommendations that you're making. It's not just like, oh, we'll lower the cost by 20% and okay, now we have a healthier bottom line. It's like, oh, this lady perhaps could have had better access to healthcare, could have had a lower out-of-pocket, could have had no out-of-pocket. All of a sudden, she's not stressing about paying not only for the premiums for healthcare she can't even really afford. She's functionally uninsured at that point. And also, my child might be able to get this ear procedure done at no out-of-pocket. What does that do for the future financially of her family if we can just make better decisions and have better conversations? And then I look at your brother's story as well. That's just almost luck of the draw, right? Like if he had somehow been recruited by this other company or worked for this other company that you managed, his outcome would have been wildly different. Probably decades of his financial security would have been different had that one thing just been slightly different to no fault of his own.
Yeah, I think about my brother's situation, and it really, I already had ideas of what it was that we were trying to do and that we were already working on and doing for people, but it put the context for me in a different light, because that's a very personal situation, your own family member. And I think all of us have somebody like my brother in their life, whether it's a family member, a friend, a colleague. We see how healthcare it's supposed to help us. Health insurance is supposed to help us. But in a lot of senses, maybe it helps us, but a lot of times it puts us at a disadvantage financially when we really need it. And so it kind of gave me a renewed sense of purpose, if you will, because every time I walk in, this is going to sound maybe a little bit cheesy, but it is the truth. When I walk into a client, I still like to meet their employees. And whether it's going into a trucking company or a warehouse company, a wholesaler, or going into a car dealership, I see my brother in those people. And I remind myself, this is somebody's dad, brother, sister, mom. This is a family member of somebody. And these people inside of these organizations and the organizations themselves, they don't know they have a voice, or they don't even have a voice to solve the issue. They're dependent upon me. And maybe that sounds inflated, but I put that on myself, that they're dependent on people in my position, whether it's me or a competitor, it's the brokerage industry. They're dependent upon us to take care of them, because if we don't do it, nobody else will.
Absolutely. And you framed it earlier when we were talking about it's kind of like stealing from the middle class in a sense, the way that our healthcare system is structured. Kind of going back to what I said before, premiums. What you said, like kind of a family typically. Yeah, premiums are going to be $15,000 to $2,000 a year, maybe even more, $2,000 a month, roughly. What is kind of the average family premium these days?
I mean, it depends on the size employer. I mean, you can look at Kaiser Family Foundation. They do a great job of publishing a study every single year that outlines costs based on employer size. But for the market that we're serving, you look at kind of the middle market. Smaller employers. We're not talking about jumbo employers here. We're talking about your family-owned or regionally owned business. The insurance cost of those employees usually ranges between $1,500 and $2,000 for a family unit.
Yeah. And that's just the premiums alone, right?
That's the premiums alone.
Yeah. So then you layer on out-of-pocket costs of what, $3,000, $5,000, $6,000, something.
$3,000 to $5,000 out-of-pocket costs. So you just think on average, family coverage is going to cost about $20,000 a year, and that's just for the right to have insurance. Then when you get sick, you have to pay out of pocket. So whether you're buying prescriptions or doctor visits or surgeries or those sorts of things, so, a lot of times people look at what's my deductible and out of pocket. But when you add the total cost of insurance and the total cost of your care, it can be $25,000 a year. And that's more money than people will spend in the middle class for cars or houses or those sorts of things. And there are ways to lower that cost to those folks. And I think about the money that's being spent there is money that's no longer going to retirement. It's no longer going to fund college educations for their kids. It's not paying for vacations or housing or whatever the middle class dream is made of that people want to spend this money on. It's now being diverted into a system that on itself, it's a behemoth industry. It's one of the largest industries in America today, is healthcare. And when I think about it, it's not a competitive marketplace. People talk about, well, there's thousands of hospitals in America and, all these insurance companies across state lines. And really when you look at it, you've got kids. When your wife had your children, did she go out of state lines to have your child?
No, we went down the street.
You went down the street, right? Yeah. So healthcare is very local. And when you look at the local marketplace, particularly in, well, really not only just large cities, but small cities, there's usually one or two dominant systems there.
Yeah.
And you go to any city, there you can identify who the large player is, because every time you drive through the city, you see their freestanding clinics and the primary care and specialty and their hospital system buildings. It's dominated. And then it's the same issue with the insurance side. I mean, we used to have 20 different insurance carriers, and now we've got 4.
Yeah.
And so it's just not competitive. And you think about what drives a competitive industry. It's access to pricing information. Do we even know what things cost?
Right.
I can get more information on a television than I can on a hip replacement.
100%.
And I can buy that television from Amazon or Walmart or Target, online, in person. And I can figure out what it costs, where to buy it, how to pay for it. Do I pay cash, check, credit card? There's all these different ways that I can do this, but you can't do that with healthcare. So that dynamic alone makes it not competitive.
Well, yeah, and it's just even the recognition that these options exist. And I want to touch base a little bit on your kind of philosophy, because all the subtext to all this, right, is what we're talking about on the solution side of this is employers are going to be self-funded for the most part. 99 times out of 100 to have access to these options, you got to be self-funded. But like, it's even just being aware that the options exist, right now. And I still I shake my head. It's 2022, and there's still some brokers or consultants that are uncomfortable understanding self-funding and being able to talk about it. There's employers that are 500 lives that have never even been introduced to the notion of self-funding. And I'm just going like, how is this even possible? It's why this stupid podcast is called Self-Funded with Spencer. But it's like just being able to tell the story broadly enough to have the conversations about it, right? But why do you think still to this day not enough people are talking about this?
I think that's a great question. It's one I've pondered often. I think there's a number of reasons. I think the first is what's the incentive? of the brokerage community at large. If you think about the way we get paid, I think a lot of people have moved away from getting a percentage commission off the premium. And not everybody has. And in the lower parts of the market, you don't have a choice. The second thing is the scalability of these businesses. So the big nationals have done a really good job. Just like we've talked about hospitals, there's this consolidation. In health insurance, there's this wave of consolidation that's happened. Well, the same thing has happened in the brokerage community. You've got these big national, in some cases global brokerages that have gone around and bought up all the independents. And they look at how do they monetize and extract the most value or create the most value for their shareholders. So a lot of them are, if you look at the top 50 brokerages in America, it's an easy Google search. They're all publicly traded or private equity backed. And that means they answer to shareholders.
Yeah.
And when you think about the quickest way to transact business, it's with one of the traditional carriers. And typically it's going to be in the fully funded model. And it goes back to my comment about inertia or momentum.
Yeah. Yep.
How do we, it's stacking Legos and collecting paychecks is what it is. And a lot of the innovation that we're seeing is from folks outside. Now you're seeing it kind of taking hold in some of those national firms now because they've kind of realized they have to do it.
Yeah.
And you've got some independent operators who've been acquired. And I'm actually friends with a number of people that work inside of those large national firms that are doing really good work.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
There's some teams that are doing some fantastic, and we collaborate with those guys. So I don't want to make it sound like it's exclusive, but I think just by and large, the momentum is there to keep doing what they're doing.
But I mean, is there an inflection point where we have reached critical mass where enough employers are aware and won't accept that status quo anymore?
I think we're at that point now. I think health
Okay.
insurance has just gotten so expensive. The word has gotten out. There's been a grassroots effort that's taken hold. And I think it was driven primarily by the lower middle market, where they were large enough to be self-funded. They were working with an independent advisor that knew what to do. And then they tell their buddies, whether they're part of YPO, Young Presidents Organization, or they're part of a business club, hey, this is what I'm doing with my insurance, and this is the result that I got, and it's passing. It's like water cooler talk. And so we're gaining momentum. I think it's picking up steam. And I think self-insuring is the fastest growing part of our business. I think a lot of people shy away from it, and a lot of it has to do with the complexity. I think about healthcare, super complex problem. Health insurance, super complex, especially when you start talking about self-funding. But let's just break it down to the most simple components. So if I came to you and said, Spencer, I see you're taking this medication. If you go to this place, it's $1,000 a month. But if you go to this place, it's $100 a month. Which would you choose?
Well, yeah, if everything was laid out like that and there weren't any other competing interests, I'd choose the cheap one, right? I'd choose the $100 a month. Yeah.
Well, I think it just, let's break it down into its most simplest components. And so instead of trying to come up with solutions, let's try to identify the problem.
Yeah.
Once you identify the problem, then you can compartmentalize. Is that an order of operation? You mentioned self-funding as a solution. It absolutely is, because if you don't self-fund, you've just turned over everything to an insurance company to buy for you. Well, as it turns out, the insurance companies, they don't buy the $100 medication. They're buying the $1,000 medication. You scratch your head and think, why would they do that? Well, it goes back to the way they make money. They make money every time you buy the $1,000 drug. And oh, by the way, they have justification for your increase that you got next year. There's just all these misaligned incentives. So if you just break the problem down to the most simplest component and then try to solve for that. So the first solution is self-fund. The second solution is, how do you buy the actual healthcare more efficiently? And if you can figure that piece of it out, now you've got a winning playbook.
Well, would you go so far as to call, I know you're a finance and economics guy, would you call healthcare an irrational market, the way that it works? I mean,
100%.
Would that be safe to say? Because, I mean, like you were saying, it's like anybody with position with those two options in the most simplistic form would choose the lower cost alternative. The problem is, we never actually get presented the options in the first place. Or if we do, we don't know what it's going to cost me because I have to wait 6 weeks or 8 weeks to get an EOB in the mail, find out what my insurance is renegotiated, and then wait again a couple more times before I even know what I'm supposed to pay. And that's 3 months, 4 months after I've consumed the healthcare. You can't go back and be like, no, I didn't want that healthcare now. It's already too late.
Yeah, I always ask this question to people. I mean, name another industry. I'm going to ask you, I'm going to put you on the spot.
Okay, please do.
So name an industry that functions like healthcare or health insurance, where you'll go in and buy something that can cost as much as a house, right? If you have cancer, if you have a complicated pregnancy, if you have a major surgery and you're hospitalized for multiple days, in a lot of cases, particularly in a metro area, Dallas-Fort Worth is one of the most expensive areas in America to buy healthcare, where you'll walk in and buy something that costs as much as a house, and you don't know the price before you buy it, you don't get a bill for 60 days, and you're not the ultimate payer. You pay a piece of it, but there's somebody else behind the scenes. And by the way, you didn't get to negotiate the price.
Right.
Somebody else did it for you, and we're just trusting them in good faith. Name another industry that works that way.
Well, clearly, it's a trick question because there's not another industry.
Somebody did bring this up to me one time. I did have a client that said this to me.
Okay.
The only industry they could think that functions like that is government.
Okay. Yeah. Well, fair enough. And that's a completely different can of worms to go down. But you're right? Because it's, they're making decisions on behalf of us, and then basically we're just obligated to pay the taxes.
We're making, so the same with the government and the same with the health insurance companies. We're assuming that they're acting in our best interest.
Yeah.
But the data doesn't suggest, it shows otherwise. And I can give you multiple examples of this.
Well, give me a data point. Yeah, give me a specific data point.
Well, I'm going through a renewal right now with a bigger client of ours, and they're self-funded. And it's a group that we just picked up in the last couple of months. And I won't name names of the insurance companies because a lot of reasons, but they're with one of the big four, self-insured, and they have an outside reinsurance company. It's one of the largest reinsurance carriers in the world. And that we shared our strategy with that reinsurer because they got a very large increase on their stop-loss premium. So the renewal is going up because they've had a pretty catastrophic year. But we've identified using data where we can lower the cost of healthcare and how we're going to manage the risk for the employer. And the stop-loss carrier looked at our strategy and said, if you are willing, employer, to implement this Hotchkiss plan, we're going to lower your renewal by 25%. So to put that into perspective, that's $400,000 of this employer. And so if I think about an independent validation point, it's easy for me to walk into an employer and say, if you do this, if you do X, you'll save Y.
Yeah.
But that's just me. I'm a guy at an independent insurance agency. Like, what does this guy know?
Yeah.
Right? But if you're talking about the largest reinsurer in the world, or it's one of the top three, they're validating it. And not only are they validating it, they're willing to put their own money on the line.
Yeah, they're assuming the risk at that price point, right?
Yeah, because if you think about the reinsurers, they're not a traditional insurance company. They don't own the pharmacy. They're not integrated anywhere. They're strictly buying risk. And so if it doesn't work, it's their money on the line.
Yeah.
So it was their way of incentivizing. They really wanted this employer to adopt some of these strategies because they knew ultimately it was going to impact their bottom line positively. And so they gave the employer a choice. Continue what you're doing, pay 25% more. Do it the Hotchkiss way, pay 25% less. What do you want to do?
We coin that. Do it the Hotchkiss way, by the way. We need to trademark that. But
I call it the benefits insider way.
Yeah, dude, I was going to ask you about that. So I want to hear more about this. You're putting together this benefits insider. What is it?
So in a nutshell, it's actually one of my clients that named it. A mutual friend of ours, Andy Neary, he actually said, hey, what you know how Andy is, hey, what you doing over here? You got to come up with a name for it.
Yeah.
I was like, a name for this? It's insurance. I don't know. What am I going to name it? He's like, you have to have a name for your plan. What is it that you do? So I started talking to some of my closest clients, and I explained that this is what we're doing. I need a name for it. And talk to me more about it. And I said, well, as an insider to the benefits industry, this is what I've designed for my own benefit plan. This is what we do for the Hotchkiss employees. We're insiders. We know where the misaligned incentives. We know where the conflicts of interest are. We've stripped those out, and it's allowed us to lower our costs and provide better benefits to our employees. And one of my clients said, that's what you should call it. It needs to be something about an insider. Well, I think about business insider, benefits insider. So it's what we do as insiders to the benefits industry for our own people.
Well, and is this like a publication? Is this an online deal? What are you doing with it to actually put it into a package?
Yeah, so I thought about this. When we meet with prospective clients, they always say, man, that sounds really cool, but do you have more information? We want to see how it works. And people consume media in a lot of different ways today, but I think very few people want to consume glossy brochures. I know when somebody gives me a glossy brochure, I'm just telling everybody out there, if you send me something, I'm going to probably delete it or throw it away. Yeah. But I like to consume videos, and I like case studies.
Yeah.
And a lot of video content. I think that's kind of the new wave.
I agree.
So what we created is a new website that we direct employers to hear from our own clients of how they're solving healthcare in their own businesses and providing better benefits to their employees at the same time.
So kind of customer testimonials almost?
It's kind of a hub, a central hub, if you will, for all things benefits for us. And it's where you can consume video media of our clients. There's other content that we've created that lives there. There's case studies. There's a cost estimator, cost savings estimator there. It's really just, it almost acts like a marketing engine for us in a way. And we've also created an insider community where we share frequently updates on the marketplace, what's going on. And really the end goal for me is to create a community of like-minded executives that want to tackle the problem of rising healthcare in their business. Because when you think about it, people think a lot of times in a 12-month vacuum or a year-to-year decision-making cycle. And I know that's becoming more and more of a buzzword in our industry. But when you think about it, an employer that pays $300,000 more this year, or maybe you're a smaller employer, your costs are going to go up by $50,000 this year. And then they go up by 25 the following year, and then 50 again the following year. And you might think to yourself, well, I only spend $50,000 more. Well, when you model that forward 5, 10 years, I mean, it could be $1 million. Yeah. And then when you think about what that ultimately means to the value of your business, it's no longer $50,000 more or $100,000 more. You've just lost $500,000 of value. Some of these other employers, when you think about this other one I just talked about, it's $400,000 of guaranteed savings
in 1 year, right?
Yeah, and that's before we even talk about the cost of healthcare. That's just the insurance piece. Yeah. And so that $400,000 is probably worth $2 million in that company. If you think that they traded a 5 times cash flow multiple, just assume
that's real value.
Let's just think about revenue and margin stay the same. We lower your cost by $400,000. It just added $2 million of your value if you were to sell. And most companies say, well, I'm not going to sell today. Well, let's model that forward. What does that look like 5 years from now, 10 years from now? It's a big, big value. And I think because it happens in a slow creep year over year, employers don't notice it as much. But I would encourage anybody listening to this, particularly CFOs, business owners, look back at your health insurance budget 5 years ago and 10 years ago and see what it was. And for some employers, that number is skewed a little bit. I had an employer tell me this one time. Well, even though the cost goes up 20%, we change our plan design, and so it really only goes up like 5 or 6% because we whittle the benefits down. Well, you can only do that so long. Yeah. And what does that do to your employees? Yep. So,
that's such a perverse way to look at it. But there's something I want to remind me before I forget. I want to introduce you to somebody after this based on the way that you were kind of evaluating the value of businesses. But what I was going to say is you told me just even a couple of years ago, you didn't want to be kind of publicly facing at all. Like you even joked around that your goal was if somebody Googles Chris Hamilton, they can't find anything. And that was only a few short years ago. Now, obviously, you flipped that on its head. What happened? Why are you being so much more vocal than you ever thought you would be?
Yeah. So I don't know why. I'm a private person. I like to kind of keep to myself when I'm not working, keep a low profile. But what I realized was a couple of things. One, the way business is being done is changing, and we have a bigger reach than we realize. There are only so many phone calls I can make in a day or introductions that I can be introduced to by centers of influence. So we do business with CPAs and bankers primarily. There's a lot of our referral sources are those folks. But I want to have a bigger reach than just that. And so I realized that social media was going to be a way to reach more people. And there are a lot of efficiencies that can be gained. Social media can work for you while you're sleeping. Yeah. So I realized that I had to kind of get out of my comfort zone and put myself out there. But in doing so, I also realized the importance of validation, putting my thoughts out into the universe, strategies out in the universe. I'll share with anybody what we're doing. And I'm not worried about a competitor taking it and doing it. I mean, I think it's good for the industry for people to share their ideas. But it has a kind of a secondary, corollary effect. Particularly online, people like to debate, is the nice way to say it, or criticize. But I think it helps us sharpen our iron. Yeah. And I like to put thoughts out into the marketplace for people to help me hone them.
I would agree completely. I was almost going to come up with an idea of a podcast called Defend Your Position, where you would actually take a stance on not necessarily a controversial topic, but a topic that might have something of substance that was worth debating, right? But you got to be able to defend your position. And so the way I take that, I never actually turned that into something like formal, but the way that I post, let's say on LinkedIn, or what I say here, I say things that sometimes I do take a position on, but I will say them publicly because I know I can defend my stance on them. Now, just like you said, though, my point of view could evolve over time. It could morph. I could have ideas challenged and even change my mind, but I'm not averse to putting on record things I believe, as long as I can defend what I say. I'm not saying outlandish things or egregious things for shock value, but if I say something, I need to be able to at least defend why I think that, even if the eventual conclusion is, you know what, maybe I don't think that. And you helped me come to that conclusion by way of us having a conversation. I love to converse, because otherwise you just shut down ideas and people get too scared to ever actually articulate themselves.
Yeah, I think that's something particularly in our, I don't want to say it's just in our industry. I think it's just our society. People are worried about being wrong or made a fool or what have you. If you're passionate about something, you have ideas, I think we have it. We need to be sharing that, particularly when there's a big problem like we're facing in our industry. I think a couple of things. One, people can be zealots about their position. And even when they're proven wrong, they continue to dig in. And that's politically, that's personally, it doesn't matter, right? So people don't want to be proven wrong. And it's almost a sign of weakness, I think, historically, to change your mind on something. I've changed my mind on a lot of things in healthcare. As new information comes to light, I'm learning things every single day. And my position has changed on a lot of topics.
Well, you said the HSA was a prime example for you, right? Like, you used to be a big proponent of HSAs, and that had altered. Can you tell me kind of what caused you to change your opinion?
So when I first got into the industry, HSAs were kind of a big wave. And the idea is that we're going to make first dollar cost for healthcare fall on the employee. And in turn, since they're going to see the true cost of things, they're going to become better consumers. But being in the industry for a number of years, what I've seen is that people buy HSAs for the wrong reason. They buy it because it's the lowest cost insurance plan. They don't really understand how it works. And let's be honest, most people, particularly in the middle class, who are facing higher gas prices, higher food prices, higher rent, everything's more expensive. They're not putting money away. They don't have savings. And anything they did have is gone to pay for these higher costs, and they're living on credit cards. And so they don't have money to pay for health care when that emergency arises. And so what they end up doing is they delay care. They don't buy their medication, or they buy 30 days worth and they're splitting the pills, or they take them every other day. And ultimately, I've been in the industry. I've had clients long enough to see this. People will end up getting really sick, and what could have been treated with a basic medication now ends up being a hospitalization, an ICU stay that's $300,000.
Absolutely, man.
And it's catastrophic to the individual, it's catastrophic to the companies, and it doesn't have to be that way. And so my philosophy has changed, where most people should have an HSA to where most people shouldn't. And I know that's not a popular opinion right now in our industry, but I will just tell you that from what I see anecdotally, and we do this, I've got some really good clients that let us experiment with them. And I say, oh, guys, this is an experiment. Why don't we try it this year? And let's just price the plans. Make them, we design them in a way where we can price them the same way, and just let the employees choose if they want a copay or not. And most people want the predictability.
Of an actual copay?
Of an actual copay. And if you have the reason why most brokers shy away from copays and skew to the HSA is because an employee might walk in and buy a drug that's $3,000 with a $50 copay, and they see a Band-Aid over the sticker, the real price. But if you know how to manage the back end costs, you can provide incentives to employees. You can design the plans and put the mechanisms in place.
I think you have to have the
that.
incentives to make them better consumers, which then that comes down to having the information at their fingertips so they can make the better decisions. Even if you're incentivized to do something one way or the other, if you don't know what your choice is or where to go to be able to achieve that $0 copay option. So then that comes down to how do we actually layer down to get the information ready for them to be able to make that choice.
Yeah. The simplest way, and I'll just encourage anybody that's out there listening to this, whether you're an employer or a broker, the most critical thing is to get access to your data, right? Because what's the saying? You can't manage what you can't measure. So when you get the data, and I would say this is true almost across the board. I mean, people use the term actuarial math, but I've yet to see this dispelled. When I look at the data, the vast majority of the claims, people talk about the Pareto principle, the 80-20. In healthcare, I think it's 90-10. And so what I want to figure out is, what is the 10% of the population driving 90% of my claims? What are they doing?
Yeah.
And it really comes down to just a handful of things that drive costs. It's cancer, it's musculoskeletal, it's chronic diseases like diabetes, those sorts of things, right? Metabolic disorder, those sorts of chronic heart issues. So very simple, data. what's driving the cost, and then just kind of compartmentalize each one of those cost drivers and figure out, is there something I can do to influence that cost? And so, yes, healthcare and health insurance is super complicated, but if you just distill it down to those basic principles, it at least gives you a starting point.
Well, it'll make it act like a more rational market, like everything else is, and that's really what kind of we're digging at. There's a couple of things I want to ask you before we get out of here, man. I know we've had a long day together, and I've really enjoyed it, man. And both got things to get on our way to do. But I know something about you that's pretty interesting that I want to talk about, kind of the individual health space. Like, and I mean, like you personally, you do a lot of things for like performance optimization and actually testing on yourself and getting things that are sort of outside of the norm, because you really want to kind of almost like hack your own health, which I find really fascinating. So can you share some of the stuff that you're doing just to sort of optimize your own human existence personally? It's pretty cool.
Yeah, so what I'm about to explain, many of our clients use this as well for their employees. You think about just your average employee, middle class employee, lower middle class, whatever, high, executive. A lot of people think this is for executives. This is for everybody. Okay. But I work with a concierge doctor. So this is a doctor that doesn't get paid every single time I go in. I pay him a subscription fee. I pay a monthly invoice. I pay her monthly. And I pay the same amount whether I see her 10 times in a month or 0 times in a month. Mm-hmm. And so she's got a recurring revenue stream. And so when I think about how traditional doctors work, they're like car mechanics. When I go into my normal doctor, primary care doctor, that doctor has to create an invoice and line item out what they did to me, what repairs or what diagnostics they did to me, so they can bill the insurance company. And the more line items they put on that bill, the more they can get paid. Mm-hmm. And so the incentive is to do more testing, call you into the office more often than you need to, and spend as little time with you as I can get away with. When you go to the subscription model, the concierge medicine model, or direct primary care is kind of a more popular term, the doctor's incentives are completely switched. They're going to get paid the same amount of money, whether they see a lot or a little. And so my doctor's incentive now has changed to, how do I keep Chris healthy? How do I treat him in the most effective way, whether that's in office or virtually, right? Because sometimes you don't have to be seen by a doctor, but doctors like to call you into the office because they get paid more. But even more importantly, how do I keep Chris happy? How do I provide good customer service? Because if my doctor doesn't take care of me in a way that I like, I can go get another one. Mm-hmm. It's really easy because she's not part of the insurance plan. So part of that health is regular testing, blood testing. And what's interesting is, I mentioned my brother earlier. Yeah. There's a family, there's a genetic component of what he's dealing with, and it's run through multiple generations of my family. And I was being treated for it too. It's heart disease basically. And I want to highlight this because this just really highlights the difference between being healthy and having access to healthcare and the way traditional doctors treat. My traditional doctor was just throwing a statin at me, and I had all these adverse reactions to these statins, and I just quit taking them. I didn't want the muscle pains or the liver issues or whatever, and I was like, I'm not doing this anymore. But when I went to see my concierge doctor, she took my first appointment with her was over 2 hours, and she highlighted, these are the things that I need to test you for that traditional insurance won't pay for, which is mind-boggling to me because this was a solution for me. Turns out I have a genetic predisposition to be a slow metabolizer of certain medications, and my statin was one. And so by her adjusting my dosage, it fixed everything, and it brought all my numbers in line. And there were a number of other tests that she had done that really helped me optimize, things I was eating that I thought was making me healthy. You think like eggs and salmon. Well, I'm highly sensitive to those, and I was having inflammation from them. And so traditional doctors, they treat you based on what the textbook says. And if you do this for 100,000 people, you're going to have a positive impact on this percentage of the population. But what about the people that are the outliers, right? I think the future of medicine is going to be individualized medicine.
Yeah, so that's more of a utilitarian approach. Like their desire is to do it gets debatable, the most good, most broadly, right, across a big swath of the population. But you're talking about individualized healthcare. I can determine what's going to be the most good for Chris Hamilton, not this employer or not this kind of population in a community, which makes a lot more sense. Right. It requires a lot more time and effort to accomplish.
Yeah, so at the end of the day, employers for that sort of practice, they're going to spend a little bit more to have a concierge doctor take care of their employees. And you can use multiple doctors. I know some people have better personality connections with different doctors, so we use multiple. But what'll end up happening is if you spend 10% more to get concierge medicine, you can probably save 15-20% on your other health, your big ticket items.
Right.
Because those doctors now they're not beholden to a big hospital system. Think about this. The hospitals have gotten really smart. They want to own the vertical. They want to own the referral pathways. And so hospitals have gone out and they've purchased primary care doctors. And they purchased the specialists. Then they purchased the imaging centers. And they purchased the other hospitals. And so what ends up happening is I see a doctor affiliated with ABC Hospital. Well, primary care doctor refers me to ABC Hospital's orthopedic surgeon.
Right.
Who sends me to ABC Hospital's imaging center, who's going to do my surgery at ABC Hospital. And so in my opinion, it's actually been documented, they can't refer outside of their own system. It's in their employment agreement. So they have to stay in their system, even if it's not the best.
Right.
So you're locked, you're stuck. And so that's the other benefit of these concierge doctors is they're not tied to a system, and they have a much smaller patient load. So they're able to develop a more individualized relationship.
Well, as I say, it sounds like the renaissance in healthcare is almost like everything new is old again, or old is new again, whatever what the phrase is. But like we're talking about going back to the notion of spending time with your patient, getting to know your patient, worried about the actual quality of care you deliver and the customer service. Like you use the term customer service. That's never anything that I would associate with going to consume some sort of healthcare is getting customer service. You might get called from somebody doing your billing or somebody doing your scheduling, but somebody truly worried about you and how you doing, how you feeling. We've stripped that out so much out of healthcare.
Well, one of the big things, I totally agree with you 100%. We are going back to kind of an old way, and we are in a renaissance period, I believe, over the next, I think you're going to see massive transformation in insurance and healthcare over the next 3 to 5 years. When I think about primary care, that is not a sexy part of the medical industry. They're kind of like the water boys, if you will. I don't want to disparage them, but if you think about it, they're not the brain surgeons, or the orthopedic surgeons, or whatever, right? The OB-GYNs. But I think they're probably the most important piece to our healthcare journey. And if you look at what's going on in the primary care market, these doctors, there's an exodus of primary care physicians. And if you want no further evidence than this emergence of urgent care clinics, freestanding ERs, they're filling the void of the
lack of primary care.
Because when you call a traditional primary care doctor for a sick visit, they'll tell you I can get you in 2 to 6 weeks.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sick today. I need care. And so those clinics are filling a void of primary care, but primary care is specifically what the name denotes. It's primary. Like that's where you should go first.
Yes.
Because if you have a really good primary care physician, a lot of the things they're your triage. And a lot of the things that people are going to specialists for really can be seen by primary care.
Well, and they're triage, and like you said, you don't want to be triaged into a fee-for-service ecosystem where they just funnel you through the system, right? You're triaged appropriately, and there's no additional kind of services rendered or charges, sort of placed upon you because you're paying that subscription model. Yeah. I will talk about DPC until I'm blue in the face.
Well, what's interesting about that is we actually survey some of the employees of our clients about different things that we're considering about doing with the benefit plan. And the number one thing, the clients that offer DPC, or we have some clients that do on-site clinics, by far and away, the feedback we get is you better not get rid of our doctors.
Yeah.
We love our doctors. And these doctors, we'll go out on a road show with them and go into these offices of the employers' offices, and these doctors are like rock stars. The employees are like, "Oh my gosh, Dr. Smith, it's so awesome to see you!" And they're coming up and giving them high fives and hugs. And these doctors are highly valued by the employees.
Well, and think about that also from the perspective of the doctor, right? To feel valued again, right? A lot of the primary care, the dearth of primary care providers out there, why there's a void, it's because they don't want to do it anymore. They're so burnt out. It sucks. The pay is not commensurate with the stress level, and they're just basically having to churn people through the door.
It's a mill.
Yeah, it's a mill, and it's really unfortunate that that's the position we got in, which is why, again, I'll talk about DPC multiple episodes where I would dedicate to it because I believe in that model. But in the interest of time, Chris, and I know you and I have been talking forever, and I think, I sit down with people sometimes and I feel like we could spend 3 more hours and we would still be talking. I just don't know if anybody would listen to it at that point. So let's maybe partition this to have an episode 3 with you. But if you don't mind, kind of closing thoughts, wrap up what we talked about today, and just kind of share your call to action with people.
So I think, well, just based on the audience, I think this is primarily brokers and advisors.
Yes, yeah.
I would encourage everybody. I really think, and this has been shared by different folks in the industry, but I really believe that the brokers in America the brokerage industry is probably one of the most important jobs in our economy today. And I think about the influence that we have over employers, particularly with strategy, because healthcare and health insurance is complicated. They rely on us to be able to help them adequately manage the risk and manage the cost. And so we're in a very unique position to help manage something that is super expensive.
Yep.
And the costs continue to rise. And it's a really good opportunity for us, not just to provide value to ourselves and our organizations, but to provide value to society. And I really believe the folks that are figuring out how to solve this problem are helping our society. I genuinely believe that. There is a big societal component to this. It doesn't matter where you fall on a political spectrum or a personal spectrum. All of us can agree how critical access to affordable health care is to our society. Mm-hmm. It's everything. Without your health, you have nothing. And all too often, people are putting off having major care done because they can't afford it. And there are solutions out there, and the advisors that are doing that type of consulting are providing a tremendous value to not just the economy, but to society at large.
Yeah, I would say, and I don't think you're overstating it at all, right? And I think it's important to reinforce that is ultimately what you're doing. And it's not just you're a broker. It's not just you're shopping insurance. Like, employers are relying on you to help them solve this for them, which in turn obviously impacts their employees, the people that they employ to run their businesses. So I don't think it's, what would you say, self-aggrandizing to say that this is a very important part of our economy.
Well, and the other thing I'll throw out there is I'm a big advocate of collaboration. And people think talking with competitors is sacrilegious or something. There's like this stigma against it. But some of the best ideas that we use today have come from working with people that would traditionally view us as competitors. But I look at it from the standpoint, it's like the passage, the scripture, as iron sharpens iron, so too does one man sharpen another. The idea that I'm going to be able to do business with everybody in this marketplace is irrational. Mm-hmm. And the thought that you and I could do it together would be irrational. Mm-hmm. Therefore, we should seek out like-minded people who are trying to solve the same problem and come up with solutions to do it. And both of us benefit, and the employers benefit, society benefits. It's just beneficial all the way around.
Yeah, well, it's
not a zero-sum game.
It's not a zero-sum game at all, man. Well, Chris, again, I can't thank you enough for joining me for a second time. Really hope you got out of today what you were hoping to get out of. And, man, I'm serious. We'll do a round through. Probably in 2023. We'll give it some space, but we'll have you again on
awesome.
soon.
Well,
Thanks,
I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
My pleasure.